Orange Sky Audio presents A Scot Mess, The Hot for Scots, Book 1, by Caroline Lee. Narrated for you by William Macleod. Prologue. The moment he'd set eyes on her, he'd known she was someone special. He had been passing through the marketplace at Wick, having finished his transaction, and was heading for a tavern for supper, which had been recommended by the merchant he'd just been haggling with. Finn Oliphant was hungry, and his steps were determined. But hearing her voice stopped him in his tracks. She had been arguing with a cloth seller for a bolt of green velvet. She'd been confident and certain of her righteousness as she haggled, and that sense of surety in her voice had piqued his interest. But when she'd turned, triumphantly struggling with the cloth she now owned, he'd found himself instantly lost in the sparkle of those perfect blue eyes. Offering to help her with the heavy bolt had been instinctual, and by the time he'd walked her to the wagon she'd brought to market, he was half in love. Despite her status as a Laird's sister, Fiona MacIan was not proud or haughty. She and her guard, an older man, who had the most unusual method of cursing, travelled weekly to surrounding markets to suss out the best deals for the MacIan's limited coin. Over meat pies, once she agreed to join him for supper, she and Finn had swapped stories and laughter over the many deals they'd made with merchants, mostly to their advantages. He'd been utterly captivated by her zest for life, her willingness to work, and her complete selflessness. She'd blushed prettily when he'd complimented her. When he'd kissed her, she'd responded exactly the way he'd hoped. They'd managed to avoid her guard for the rest of the evening, and had spent the time wrapped in each other's arms in the hayloft of the tavern's stables. Oh, Finn hadn't compromised her, despite how desperately aroused she'd made him, but they'd spent the time learning about one another's pasts, tasting one another's lips, and planning for a future together. The next day, Fiona twisted in her seat at the front of the wagon to blow him a kiss as she headed away from Wick. Finn had stood there in the road, watching her until she was out of sight. He suspected he should feel sad, should feel bereft, knowing winter would be upon them soon and chances to travel would be limited. But he felt none of those things. Instead, his heart was soaring, flying. Despite his lack of release last night, he'd never spent a happier time in a woman's arms. Aye, Fiona MacIan was heading away from him, but that mattered not.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?